this has two parts to it. One is a part you may have seen in the news. The second part is one I promise you have not seen. So this has to do with Donald Trump. He's just finished his first 100 days in this term. It's not going well. His support is dropping even among many of his most fervent supporters because it turns out he's really shitty at this job. He surrounds himself by people who are even dumber than he is. His voters are even dumber than they are. This goes down for a while. He hasn't done the stuff he campaigned on, and the stuff he has done is just idiotic and destroying our country, right? So the Pew Research Center did a survey on whether or not people are supporting Trump, and they broke it down by religion. And this is where it gets interesting, because this is their headline that they posted this week. Here we go. White evangelicals continue to stand out in their support for Trump, which I know that's not surprising. Of course, white evangelicals like Donald Trump, but let me give you some numbers to back this up. In 2024, in the election, roughly 80% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. And that's pretty much the same percentage we saw in 2020 and in 2016. So 80% of them still by his side, not very smart people. Okay, that represents about 20% of the electorate, by the way. But according to Pew, what percentage of white evangelicals thinks, how many of them approve of the job Donald Trump is doing? Well, check this out. This is what they found. What percentage of people who approve or disapprove of the way Trump is handling his job? Let's scroll to white evangelicals right above my head here. 72% of white evangelicals approve of the job Trump is doing. Remember, 80% of white evangelicals voted for him. That support has now dropped to 72%. Interesting. And I know approving or disapproving of what he does, I disapproved of stuff Biden did. I would vote for him again in a heartbeat. So it's not necessarily the same thing, but it seems like there has been a drop in support among all of these groups. But among white evangelicals, it did not drop very much. I'll show you the rest of this graph and I'll remove myself from it because there are a couple other things to notice here. 72% of white evangelicals approve of Trump, and that is more than white non-evangelical Christians, 51% approval, and white Catholics, 51% approval. Black Protestants hate the dude, only 10% approval. And of course, people with no organized religion at all at the very bottom, only 26% of approval. So again, the takeaway here is that white evangelicals still support Trump, and their support has gone down, but it hasn't gone down that much. That's the big takeaway from Pew. And what does that tell us? It goes to show you no amount of needless cruelty or massive lies or total incompetence will lead conservative Christians to waver in their support for Trump. Like, once you have convinced them to accept things on faith, no amount of evidence is going to change their minds. It's true of religion. It is true of politics with those people specifically. All right. So here's another way we could look at the same data, or at least a different way of looking at it. Pew researchers also asked participants, how do you feel about the ethical standards in the Trump administration? Which is a hilarious question because, of course, the answer is what ethical standards? But again, what do you think about the ethical standards of people like Pete Hegseth, who leaked classified data, and RFK Jr., who is decimating our research capabilities while failing to contain an outbreak of measles? And what about Doug Burgum, who is getting rid of the people who maintain our national parks? Like, you get a choice. They gave people a choice of poor all the way to excellent. 4 options. How do you rate their ethics? And it turns out overall, 43% of all Americans say the ethics of this administration are poor. It was the worst option on the list, and 43% of Americans say it's poor. I mean, true, but also just 43%? Really? Okay. But look at how they broke it down with religion. Let me show you this. I'll remove myself here. What percentage say the ethical standards of top Trump administration officials? And look at white evangelicals. 34% of white evangelicals say the ethics are excellent. And then another 35% say they're good. That is 69% of white evangelicals who say, yeah, we're totally cool with the ethics of this administration. And both of those numbers, 34% and 35%, are bigger than any other category, any other groups in those numbers. Sorry, I said that totally wrong. But you could see those bars, the 34, 35%, it's bigger for white evangelicals than for any other religious group. Kudos to religiously unaffiliated people. 59% of us say the ethics are poor. And the only reason we said poor is because none is not on the list. But also hats off to Black Protestants, because they see through this guy. 63% of Black Protestants say the ethics are poor, and another 26% say they are only fair. So when you ask white evangelicals about the ethics of this administration, nearly 7 out of 10 of them are like, yeah, they're above board. You cannot trust a white evangelical for guidance on how to live a moral life, because their moral compass is broken. They cannot spot immorality if it is staring them in the face. Here's one more question. What about trusting Trump? Again, the question is, what percentage of people, do you trust Donald Trump more than or less than or the same as previous presidents in office? So, do you trust Donald Trump? And what do you think white evangelicals said? And I'll give you a hint. White evangelicals believe the planet is about 6,000 years old, and that Jesus rose from the dead, and that eating an apple caused all the sin in the world. They're not good at picking up on obvious bullshit. So what did they say when it came to the trustworthy numbers? Well, check this out. Here we go. What percentage of white evangelicals right over here said they trust Trump more than previous presidents? 57% of white evangelicals say they trust Trump more than someone like Joe Biden, or even in theory, like George W. Bush. 57% trust Trump more. His entire life has been dedicated to telling lies about everything. And they're like, yeah, he's our dude. If you think Trump is an honest guy, maybe you like his policies because you're extremely stupid. But let's say you like his policies. You can still admit, yeah, he lies all the time, but I do like the stuff he does. You could say that. They're not even saying that. They're like, yeah, I trust him. As one commenter points out, trust Trump with what exactly? Yeah, I mean, just in general. They just trust the dude. What about non-religious people? 18%. Only 18% of us are like, yeah, we trust this dude. Again, hats off to Black Protestants, who only 9% of them say they trust Trump, because, yeah, they have good reason not to trust that guy. But oh my God, how do you trust this dude? There's no getting through to them. It seems like the white evangelical system here is we will believe anyone who is white, male, and speaks with confidence. We'll do it in church if you're in the pulpit, and we'll do it in politics if you just say things. So that's part one. When I was looking at that data, none of that really surprised me. I'm not expecting moral clarity from white evangelical Christians. It doesn't surprise me he's doing really well with that particular group, because they do not give a damn about values. They never have, but they definitely don't in the Trump era. They will overlook family values that they always brag about when Trump is separating families. And they will ignore the Jesus message of care for the least of these if Trump is punishing brown people they don't like. So none of that surprises me. But here's what I was trying to figure out. You saw in all of those charts I just showed you that they lumped together all the unaffiliated, the religiously unaffiliated people. We're all the nones. That means the atheists, the agnostics, and the growing number of people who say, I'm not an atheist. I think there's something spiritual out there, but I don't belong to any organized religion. And I don't like that group because they're always wrong about everything else too, and they just drag our numbers down. So I asked the Pew Research Center, I'm like, I saw these numbers, but do you have a breakdown of what atheists said about all these things? I don't want to know what the religiously unaffiliated said, because that is a lump of numbers that makes no sense. It's like saying, this is why you never say, what do Christians think about Donald Trump? Because whatever answer I give you doesn't mean anything, because Black Protestants are very different about their beliefs than white evangelicals, as you just saw. So it doesn't make sense to lump together Christians. And using the same logic, I don't think it makes sense to lump together religiously unaffiliated people, because what atheists say is very different than what the New Age Gwyneth Paltrow, I'm spiritual but not religious people say. So I asked the Pew Research Center, do you have any numbers for me about atheists specifically? Right? And by the way, in 2024, exit polls showed that 27% of religiously unaffiliated voters supported Trump. Only 27%. I was looking for numbers like, how did atheists vote in the election? I still haven't found them because no group has broken down that data. So guess what? Pew Research Center said, yeah, we did break it down with atheists, and they sent me the numbers. And this is the part that has not been seen yet because they did not publish this, but they were nice enough to send it to me. Now, the reason they did not publish this, and this is the caveat, I'm fully admitting this, their sample size for atheists was really small. And that means the margin of error is going to be much, much higher. So it's not as reliable information as they had for white evangelicals, for Black Protestants, even for religiously unaffiliated people as a whole. That's why they didn't include this breakdown in their data. It makes sense from a statistical perspective, but I still want to show you what some of these numbers said. Okay, so let's start with Trump's approval rating. Like I showed you earlier, we know 72% of white evangelicals approve of what Donald Trump is doing, and only 26% of religiously unaffiliated Americans feel the same way. But what's the breakdown for atheists? Well, check it out. Here you go. And I'll remove myself here and talk about this. You could see religiously unaffiliated, 26% of religiously unaffiliated approve of Donald Trump, but look at the atheist number, 15%. Only 15% of atheists approve of this administration. And yes, the margin of error is higher, but there you go. Atheists are much more perceptive of how bad Donald Trump is than religiously unaffiliated people as a whole. So that is really, really interesting right there. At this point, you have to be one of those clueless atheists for liberty types to still think Trump is on the right track with anything. Okay, what about ethics? That was number 2. We said 69% of white evangelicals think the Trump administration's ethical standards are excellent or good. And only 23% of religiously unaffiliated people feel the same way. Well, what is it for atheists? Check this out. Ethical standards of Trump administration officials. Only 5% of atheists say it's excellent. And only 9% say it's good. 80, look at this. Where is it? It's there. 80% of atheists say the ethical standards are poor because that's the lowest option we can give it. We are so much better at figuring out ethical morality here than the most fervently religious people in the country. So that, again, fascinating information. And then the last thing was trusting Trump, right? Do you trust Donald Trump compared to previous presidents? We said 57% of white evangelicals say they trust Trump more than the alternatives. Only 18% of religiously unaffiliated Americans felt the same way. So what do atheists say specifically? Let's see right here. When it comes to trusting Trump, do you trust Trump more than everybody else? Atheists, only 11% of atheists say, I trust Trump more. 76% say, no, I trust him less. And by the way, 11% say they trust Trump more, but look at the margin of error. It's huge. It's 10.6%, which means this, in theory, the 11% who trust Trump more than previous presidents, in theory, we could be talking about like 0%. We're pretty damn close to zero. You could go that way. But the point is, even if the margin of error went in the other direction, and you said 20% of atheists think he's trustworthy or something like that, it would still pale in comparison to what white evangelicals think of this guy. So, very interesting, right? Basically, no matter what question you ask about the quality of this presidency, white evangelicals overwhelmingly approve of Trump, while atheists overwhelmingly reject him. And there's no margin of error that is going to take away from that basic fact. And given the way the American public is fed up with Trump's incompetence, with a majority of Americans now disapproving of his presidency, I would argue it seems like atheists are way more representative of the public at large, right? We're ahead of them. We're light years ahead of where the rest of the country is right now. They're catching up to us, not white evangelicals. So if you want to know where the country is headed, look to us, because we see what's going to happen. We're the ones whose patriotism should not be questioned here. Our demand for quality should not be subject to some right-wing purity test. And our respect for the sort of work done by federal workers who should be admired by the rest of the country, like, we're the ones that have respect for them. If Democrats want to regain control of the House and the Senate and win the presidency after that, I think it would be smart for the candidates who are announcing or about to announce to reach out to their most loyal voters and get them on board. And that is secular Americans. And I'm not saying they need to advocate for atheism. I don't think it's their job. I'm not asking them for that. But they need to advocate for church-state separation, funding of scientific research and our institutions dedicated to that, accountability for all employees, and not in the bullshit Doge way that Elon Musk is doing, but actual accountability and efficiency, an acceptance of reason-based policies, and guess what? A return to actual morality as pillars for what this party should be doing moving forward. Like, the Congressional Free Thought Caucus actually is doing all of that stuff. That's part of their core mission. But there's no reason the entire Democratic Party should not be following suit. Because if you think there is moral bankruptcy in this administration, you're not going to find it with white evangelical leaders. You will find it with secular Americans. And these polls show we get it in a way that religious Americans don't. What other questions we got here? Dems need to advocate for something. Their platform has largely been not Trump for years now. I agree, but I would also say, guess what? A lot of Democrats do advocate for stuff. It just gets lost in the ether. What you need are really good communicators. I absolutely think the world of AOC right now. Max Frost is doing fantastic work. Jamie Raskin has always been a leader in this sense. There are people who can really advocate for the good of what the Democratic Party stands for and could be doing, and calling out what Republicans are doing that's so harmful. And the better they are at capturing that attention, the more people will actually get to hear it. It's a little staggering that only 5% of Americans are atheists. That's roughly correct. Yeah, I would have thought that with the spread of the internet, more people would be exposed to more rational thinking. So much for that. I mean, to be fair, the most famous atheists some people know are people like Richard Dawkins, Bill Maher, people like that, who are not exactly rational. So, but also I would say, yes, it's true. The percentage of atheists has not shot up, but the percentage of people who have left organized religion because they realize religion's not a force for good, that has gone up. And I think that has accomplished a lot of the same ideas you're thinking about. I don't need them in my club to agree with them, but I do think they should understand, if their eyes are open, they will understand organized religion is not fixing all these things. Hammond is preaching. Love it. Am I? I feel like I'm just stating the obvious in some cases.